Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 22nd Annual Central Texas African American Family Support Conference. I apologize for our late start. We had some technical difficulties. My name is Sonia Hartman. I'm your moderator for today's session. Shortly, we will enjoy addressing the impact of domestic violence on the African American community, a community response. But before we get started, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Austin Independent School District. Thank you for helping making this possible. This is a safe and supportive space. Please help us maintain a respectful and inclusive environment. Please mute yourself at all times. Please use the chat function in Whova to interact with other attendees. For questions for the presenter, please use the Q&A function in Whova. I know you guys have heard all of these housekeeping items, but I will repeat them again. If you feel overwhelmed or need to talk to someone during the session, please call 512-472-4357, press 1 and then 1 again for immediate emotional support. Between the sessions, we do have our comfort room, our comfort suite, and that is going to be found in the community section in the main navigation of Whova. We have several surveys that you guys have already completed, as you've done numerous sessions already. But just a reminder, if you are registered for a CEU, please check the chat for the links. The first link will sign you in for your CEU, and then please sign in at the beginning of the session. After the workshop, there will be another link for CEU evaluations. Please click on that link for a short evaluation, which also includes the CEU request. Once you've completed the evaluation, you'll be taken to a page with a link to get your CEU certificate. And the last link will be for the session evaluation. Please take this survey and get a chance to win a $25 gift certificate. I also need to let you know that we have some great conference merchandise, so be sure to check out our online store at ctaafsc.com/shop. So without further ado, I would like to present to you our speaker, Jacqueline Miller. Jacqueline has 36 years of work experience within the violence against women movement across the nation. For 6 years, Jacqueline managed an intimate partner homicide reduction project across the state of Florida. In August of 2020, Jacqueline contributed to the National Black Agenda Consortium by expanding its document to include a section on the impact of domestic violence has on Black women in their overall well-being. Jacqueline is the founder and CEO of Healthy Actions Intervening Responsibly, or spelled out as H.A.I.R, or as the acronym of H.A.I.R. So without further ado, I want to hand this presentation over to Jacqueline. And after you review her presentation is live. So let me hand this over to Jacqueline. And we'll, without further ado, thank you all for staying with us this afternoon. And I'll come back at the end for question and answers.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I appreciate your introduction. I want to thank the entire team that's with me here today. Thank you, Integral Care, for another opportunity to come back and to be part of another conference, the Conference 2022. I am so grateful to be here to share my experiences and to help to raise the awareness of domestic violence and the impact that it has on the African American community. This is one of my favorite topics and presentations to give and to make. However, it is not fun whatsoever. It is not, it's not one of the best things to be talking about. However, I am honored to be in the space with you to bring forth this information. I am sure that you have had a most amazing experience at the conference this year. So I'm going to go ahead and delve right on in. Again, I thank you. I appreciate you for being here. And I encourage you to use the chat box to share your thoughts and to give feedback as you desire to do so. So again, thank you for being here at our conference this year. This is my third conference that I am engaging with and a part of. So indeed, I am very honored to share my experiences with all of you today. So our learning objectives. The warning signs of battering personality, that is one that is very important, that people will get some ideas of how to begin to know that they might be in an abusive relationship. Number two, the ways and reasons there was a spike in domestic violence during the COVID pandemic. Number three, how domestic violence impacts one's mental health and wellness. And finally, safety options and resources. Those are our learning objectives today. So I'm going to start out with the definition of domestic violence. What I've learned across my 36 years of work experience within the domestic violence movement, as well as I identify as a survivor of childhood exposure to domestic violence, is that not a lot of people are aware of the definition and the meaning of domestic violence. But domestic violence is a pattern of coercive behaviors designed to dominate an intimate partner or family member through fear and intimidation. So what does this mean? This means that domestic violence is not an isolated incident. Many people might think of it as, one person fighting the other, they both hitting each other, or where it's a one-time incident. Oh, it's not that bad. Oh, but when we really look at the behaviors, very soon we will see, very often we see that there is a pattern of abuse. That is not a one-time isolated incident by no means. Okay, and so when we look at like the pattern, we look at the coercive behaviors, which is many times includes the abuser, where it's an abuser that is using and establishing power and control over another individual, over an intimate partner or a family member. And throughout my presentation, I might refer to victims as she and he. I do want to tell you this up front, is that we do recognize, we do know that men can be victims of domestic violence. Absolutely no question about that. As I have done the work within the field, those 3+ decades, is that what we've learned is who the majority of the victims are. As I've worked in a hospital setting, working with patients who were being seen by physicians, who were screened for domestic violence, who was there to get help, or who was there to get treatment for an injury, the majority of those patients were women. And I'm going to talk more about that, like in terms of victims, what we see, what we've seen, what we know. And a lot of times we may not hear men coming forth as victims, sharing their experiences of being victims of domestic violence. And that's for many reasons. And some of the reasons is that men are not allowed to show some form of weakness, or if they tell someone that they're being emotionally, physically, and mentally abused by a partner, then they can be shamed upon. They can be embarrassed by that. So a lot of times men may not disclose that they are experiencing domestic violence. That's number one. Number two, what we found and seen is that, based on my experience working at a hospital, is that men who come in with an injury, on however severe or serious it is, many times they are not interested in getting help, such as counseling, or many times they aren't trying to find a place to go for themselves. They aren't trying to find a place to go or to protect children. That's what I've seen in my experience. And that's what many advocates who's doing the work across this nation have said. So what that also tells us is that women who are victims of domestic violence and go to the hospital for treatment or try to go to a shelter, many times they have children they are trying to protect. So it's more than just them that they're trying to find safety for. Whereas for men, once again, based on my work experience, is that men are usually not in danger, imminent danger, in terms of wanting to go to a shelter, or they're not trying to protect children, or they are not trying to find a safe place and then a place where they can feed children. Those are all the opposites of women. And then another category of men who might not come forth, we might not identify as victims of domestic violence and who might not disclose abuse, are men who are in same-sex relationships. Once again, men in same-sex relationships can be made to be embarrassed or seen as weak. Many times they may not go to seek help even within the criminal justice system, or go to the police or make a police report, or even seek an order of protection, once again, out of being embarrassed or being ashamed as a man, where sometimes there are comments made to them and they are made fun of because it seems that they can't handle their business. And then the last category of men that we might not hear from or might not see or identify as victims of domestic violence, that's men who are elderly. Very often they are isolated, one of those populations of vulnerable groups. So therefore, I wanted to make sure we all know and understand that men can be victims of domestic violence, and very often they are. But what we know based on statistics and based on those who are coming in for help, based on those who are calling the hotline, most times and most likely they are women. Okay, so let's look at the coercive behaviors. I'm going to go into some of what that looks like even further. But those coercive behaviors is forcing someone to perform certain duties of the household, or forcing someone to do certain things out of fear and intimidation. I'll talk about what some of that looks like in just a little bit. Perpetrators, here's a key thing, might often use a combination of tactics, which includes physical abuse, sexual violations, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, and I can go on and on and on. And the thing about this, the key thing about the definition of domestic violence is that perpetrators design their tactics of abuse. They are the ones that create which form of abuse that might be used. And also, they are the ones who determine when and where those abusive tactics might be used. Once again, to put the victim, most often their intimate partner or family member, under fear and intimidation. The other thing is domestic violence occurs across and amongst all races, all religions, socioeconomic groups, heterosexual groups, and same-sex couples. So those are some key basic things that I want to get us started from for the furtherance of this conversation. And keep in mind that the perpetrator designs tactics of abuse to maintain power and control. So here's a power control wheel. Well, we know sometimes that happens, and not all domestic violence or abusive relationships might all have all of these various things in it. Many times it may be just one or two things, because what the abuser gets is that power and control, which is at the root of this, which is at the center of this, the desire to have power and control over an individual. Not all abusers might use physical abuse. Not all abusers might use emotional abuse. Not all abusers might use psychological abuse. So using intimidation, and these that's going around this wheel are the spokes, or some things or examples that could happen in a domestic violence relationship. So using intimidation, making that victim afraid by using looks or gestures, sometimes the actions, or smashing things. There are many times we might hear about an incident of domestic violence where there was some physical abuse, and we might sometimes hear about it let's just say on the news. A lot of times, if there has been damage in the house, like punching holes in the wall, we might find that, or we might find broken glass or broken furniture. When victims we've had conversations with will have a moment to think about, reflect, or even list the things that were damaged in their household. Sometimes it may start out as them saying, oh, it was just a rage. My partner went into a rage and everything just happened so fast. I can't remember. Stuff was flying everywhere. The kids were crying. But the moment that that individual is in a safe space and asks the question, so tell me what things were broken, what things were smashed. Can you tell me what those things are? A lot of times at the end of that list, that victim's survivor will list things and realize that all of these things are mine. Abusers don't tend to break and destroy their own things. They are likely, most likely, to break and destroy things that belong to their victim. And what does that do? That sends that victim a message that it could be you next time. Like a hole in the wall. A lot of times if a victim is asked, well, where were you when the hole was punched in the wall? Many times the victim will say, I was standing right there. My head was right there. They just missed my head. That sends a direct message to the victim that it could be worse next time. Also, another thing is destroying pets, abusing pets. Very often abusers would kill the victim's pets or kill the family pet. Once again, that sends a message to the victim and even those that they love that it could be you next time. I have talked to many victims and survivors throughout my work as a counselor advocate over these numbers of years, and many of them have said they return home from work just to see their cat strangled in the floor. And again, it sends a message to the victim that it could be you next time. So the other thing is like using emotional abuse, putting them down, making them feel bad about themselves, calling them names, making her think she's crazy. I've worked with several whose abusers did this very thing, undermined her authority, undermined her decision-making, undermined their parenting, and made them feel like they were really losing their mind and have gone so far. Once again, this is establishing power and control, has even gone so far to their medical provider to say, that medicine you have her on is really making her crazy. It's just way too strong and you need to change that. I've known of that to happen. I've also known of abusers to go to the police and to say, you know what, I'm just really concerned about the children because this, I don't know what's up with her. She's crazy, man. I'm telling you, something needs to happen. That then began a paper trail, like where it was against her and building this case that is something wrong with her to make her look crazy. Then the other thing is playing a lot of mind games, humiliating. I just want to give a reminder for those that just entered the room. We do know and recognize that men can, in fact, be victims of domestic violence. What we do know as well is the majority of victims of domestic violence are women and their children. Those that are the most vulnerable, those that are most likely to be turned away from shelters because they're too full. Whereas men, based on my experience, have not felt so in danger that they can't return home. Most likely, a lot of times, if they are injured, guess what? At the end of that ER visit, where are they going? They're going back home and not afraid to do so. And that's the very opposite that we see and find with women and children. Using isolation, confronting or controlling what she does. Do you know that abusers actually control victims' access to the mail, to their phone, to the voicemail. Some abusers actually go through a victim's phone to see who she's talking to, or her or him, to see who they're engaging with, to see who they're going out with. And a lot of times there's an interruption in them being able to be with family. Using isolation. Some perpetrators have moved their families from afar distances from their family so that they have no support system, so that they can't be in contact with their parents or their mom or their siblings, purposely moving the family into an area where there's no public transportation, where you really do need to have a car to get around. Okay, so a lot of using isolation, as well as like jealousy. Maybe an abuser or perpetrator may say, I don't want you with your cousin because that's the one, she's nothing but a hoe. I don't want you with her because you know what, she too wild and I ain't trying to have that. Everything is fine until your mother comes around. Everything is fine until your brother gets in our business. That then can be a strong indication that that victim will begin to be isolated. And sometimes where it can look like the abuser, the perpetrator loves them so much and he's so in love with me, jealous of me. I've heard a lot of victims say it felt good that their partner was jealous of other people, wanting to control all of their time, not wanting them to be around other people, or putting up a fight when they're ready to go out with friends. Once again, these are also part of the red flags of battering personality. The minimizing, denying, and blaming, making light of the abuse. I didn't push you that hard, you failed. Or I didn't punch you, you were drunk anyway. We were both drinking. Like really minimizing and dismissing that victim's voice and talking about the experience that it had on them. Saying that it was her fault in the first place. It wouldn't have jumped off like that had she not got in my business and running her mouth. So you hear all of that, the denying, minimizing, and blaming. Using children is a huge one, where victims, what I've learned within my career, and other advocates across this nation have attested this as well, the thought is that victims of domestic violence or women don't care nothing about their children. They're just so concerned about these men. I've heard people say that. Like, oh, child, they don't care what happened to them kids, honey. If she cared, she would do something different. If she cared, she wouldn't go out. If she cared, she would leave. If she cared, she would get rid of him. If she cared, she wouldn't be in a relationship. I have heard so much about this particular thing here. But what we do know is that battered women, victims of domestic violence and abuse, will go through all lengths to protect their children. We do know that. Some have gone to the extent of living underground, changing their appearance, have gone through certain extents of quitting their job, moving many of times. And I don't in any way mean to distract the issue of missing and exploited children. That is not my purpose. But what I do want to tell you is that victims of domestic violence have used that system to distract an abusive father or an abuser who has threatened to kidnap or to kill their children by reporting the child as missing. Battered women have strategies, and again, will go through many lengths, extensive lengths, to protect themselves and their children. Sometimes the way this looks is like making a victim feel guilty about their children. Maybe the child has a disability. I have heard many survivors say that they were blamed that their child was born not hearing or was born with a disability, and they are blamed for that. I have also heard survivors talk about how the violent and abusive behavior interrupts their ability to parent their child. Or sometimes abusers have engaged their children in the battering personality. There was some time I did some work at a shelter, and one of the little boys that was brought in with his mom, was being abusive towards the staff members, blocking the door, not allowing them to leave, standing over them, asking them who are they on the phone with, and even saying, I'm going to tell my dad. Or if they was working with the mom, that child would say, I'm gonna tell dad you were talking to other people. I'm gonna tell dad they gave you some paper. You took somebody's phone number. And then there have been many cases where abusers involved the children in the battering and abusive behaviors by having the child to call their parent out of her name. Use the B word, use the H word. She ain't nothing but a skank. She ain't nothing but a this, and she ain't nothing but a that. And then telling the child, you can tell her, you can say it, ain't nothing gonna happen to you. You can tell her what she is. Nothing's gonna happen to you. I'm here. And really engaging that child in that abusive and battering behavior. The other thing is threatening to take the child, threatening to kill the child. I'm going to get a little bit into that and just a little bit like how the risk factors of homicide or domestic violence homicide does play into this. And also threatening to remove the children that she would never see the child again. And then also threatening to kill other members of the family, which is considered collateral victims. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then using the male privilege, treating her like a servant, expecting that partner, the victim, to do all of the work in the household, not sharing parenting responsibilities, even sometimes expecting them to be a sex servant. Like no is not acceptable. Like you don't have an option to say no. If you say no to me, then that means that gives me an idea or a thought that maybe you're cheating on me. And I've heard so much about that as well, where victims of domestic violence have not been allowed to use protection during intercourse. And a lot of times an abuser might purposely force sex upon a victim for the purpose of impregnating them. And then, so there's a whole piece I've learned and heard about that as well, just in terms of unplanned pregnancies that a victim might have, not being able to plan for reproduction or plan like family planning. And many times what I've seen, a lot of those forced pregnancies have resulted in an abortion or terminating a pregnancy. I've seen that a lot within the hospital setting. Okay, the next thing is using economic abuse, preventing them from getting or keeping a job. Now, probably I want to say more, I'm going to probably focus on this piece right here, because this has been a really huge deal, especially given the climate that we're in right now with the pandemic. So for victims that have gotten jobs and gotten hired, abusers have done many things to sabotage their being able to keep a job in such ways as, for those I've heard a lot from, like nurses and CNA, where their abusers have destroyed and damaged their uniforms. I remember working with someone whose abuser cut the uniforms up and did it the very morning as she was getting ready for work. And then what did that do? Cause her to call in. Then another thing is abusers have had their victims under surveillance while they're at work. I have heard tons of stories, once again, of victims being on their work site, the abuser sitting outside the window, stalking them at work. Also, if in a hospital setting, abusers have gone in the hospital and sat right in the waiting room, waiting for them to come out. How many times have I answered and responded to safety planning with a CNA or a nurse within a hospital setting who was looking to get something done, to get something changed or something to happen because they were being stalked at work, but at the same time did not want to tell their supervisors out of fear of being fired. Some abusers have gone through the length to call their partner's work phone and leave back-to-back messages, completely filling up their work phone with messages. And so I mean, I hope you're filling up this chat box with your thoughts and reflections. And maybe you know someone who is experiencing domestic violence right now, and all of these things are speaking loudly, or maybe even you yourself is resonating with you. That's because domestic violence is so common. It is a very common thing, and not many people know what makes it an abusive relationship, or don't realize that this is not okay and it's not a private matter. It is the community's business. So using threats, making and carrying out threats to do something to hurt her and the children, or to hurt the family, threatening to, if she leaves, this is a big one. If they leave, I'm going to commit suicide. So what that tells us a few things. If a perpetrator threatens to commit suicide if their victim leaves, then that tells us a few things. That the perpetrator is most likely to kill their victim. Not many perpetrators of domestic violence are likely to kill themselves and leave their victims. They're more likely to kill their victims and take a run for it. That's what we've seen in this field, in this work, and in this movement. Where perpetrators threaten to commit suicide, we've seen them kill a family member or kill the child. So that is a big red flag. In fact, that is a risk factor for homicide, is one threatening to kill themselves, and we know it is a domestic violence situation or relationship. Also, making a victim that goes for an order of protection or to press charges, forcing them and making them to drop the charge. I know a lot of times people will say, well, she won't press charges. I don't know. Maybe she don't want no help. You know, we told her that, we went down there with her. We encouraged her. We told her, you know, you can get order of protection, go and make a police report. And she just dropped the whole thing. Well, there's a reason why she's dropped the whole thing. And that's something we need to be mindful of, because guess what? No one is living in her situation, in her shoes, but her. She is the expert in her situation, right? She's the expert in her living conditions. She knows and realizes just how dangerous her situation is. She knows and realizes, she knows what her perpetrator and abuser is capable of. She knows once she calls the police and make a police report, they have to go back to the station. She knows once she calls her pastor and sits down and counsel them and say, now we got to do better here, y'all. We need to be doing better. We can't be hurting each other now. We shouldn't be doing that. She knows pastor has to go back home. She knows she is the expert in her situation. She knows what's at stake. He knows what's at stake, right? So we can also, once again, apply this to men who can be victims of domestic violence as well. So warning signs for battering personality: embarrassing or putting you down, looking at you or acting in ways that scare you, controlling who you see, where you go, what you do, keeping you or discouraging you from seeing your friends or family. I covered a lot of this already. Taking your money, refusing to give you money for expenses, preventing you from making your own decisions, undermining your decisions, interrupting your autonomy. There have been several that have decided to go back to school, victims of domestic violence, decided to go back to school, and the abuser would tell them, you're so stupid. Man, you can't learn nothing. You dumb. You know you failed and drop out of the 8th grade anyway. So when you going back to school and getting threatened, believing and seeing that they're going to lose control. At the root of this is the batterer wants to gain and maintain control, not to lose control. So at any point, if a victim is trying to improve themselves, better their lives, go to school, get a job, move into a better neighborhood, that perpetrator gets threatened, feels threatened, and feels and sees that they are losing some control. Telling you that you're a bad parent, preventing you from working, blaming you for the abuse, destroying property, slapping, choking, and hitting. I'm going to come back to the choking part in just a little bit, and threatening to kill their victim. Pressuring them to use drugs and alcohol. There was a woman that I was working with, and when she would not engage in drugs, her girlfriend said, so you think you better than me? So you think you better than me? Oh, so you're going to be all that, huh? And that then pressured her to prove she was not trying to be better than her. So then that started her plight of drugs and alcohol use. And sometimes even preventing a survivor, a victim, from using birth control. Once again, because a lot of times an abuser will see it as, okay, so if you want to use birth control, I mean, so you must be screwing somebody else then. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't be trying to use no birth control. So you want to use protection or condom, does that mean you screwing somebody else? Because otherwise you'll give me the real thing. And I have heard abusers say when a condom was used, they purposely, when she wasn't looking, punch pinholes in the condom out of wanting to trap that individual in a relationship. So you all tell me in the chat box, have you ever met a woman that would get pregnant and like, you know what, I'm done with that relationship. Yep, I'm pregnant now, I'm good. I mean, like really wants to end a relationship as they learn that they're pregnant. So a lot of times what that is the abuser is forcing this pregnancy upon them as a way to trap them into the relationship. So battering is not a loss of control. It's a way of achieving and gaining control. Sometimes victim might say, "Woo, she just snapped. She snapped right off. She went in a rage. She went completely off." But what we know about battering, what we know about the definition, it tells us battering is not a way to lose control. It's a way to gain and achieve and to keep control. So domestic violence is a public health issue. We've seen in the hospital arena is that up to 35% of those hospital visits are a result of domestic violence assaults. More than 1 million victims of abuse seek medical attention for injuries caused by battering each year. It is known that battering, domestic violence, is more common than automobile accidents, rapes, and muggings combined. It is truly one of the leading causes of injury to women in the US. So taxes of physical abuse. When someone is physically abused, this is what happens: punching, slapping, kicking, driving recklessly, withholding medications. Whoa, let me zone in right there. There have been so many victims that I've talked to where the abusers withheld their medications from them. And guess what we see? Or guess what we think? That she doesn't care, she's negligent of her health, or she just lazy. She really doesn't want to get better. She really just does not, whatever. She's irresponsible. But we do know that abusers have withheld medications from their victims. I mean, I could go on and on with you all day about examples on this, but I'll talk about this one that maybe a lot of people may not consider or think about. Someone I was working with that was diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer, and during the night, her partner would keep her awake, right? The moment she goes to sleep, the partner, and this is very graphic. This is very, what I learned when I came into this movement, I was told to say it like it was, to say it like it is. And Jacqueline, if you're not ready and you can't hear, you probably need to reconsider what you want to be doing if you want to be doing this work. So I tend to say it and keep it real and keep it in the raw, that it's relatable and that it's practical. And so this woman said that she would be asleep, and guess where the very area her abuser was attacking her was in her breast, punching her in the breast. Many times she would go to the hospital, she would have a fist mark in her breast, or she would have finger marks where he took it and squeezed her breast, and literally would make light in front of it and saying, well, if you had have let me take care of you much sooner, maybe you wouldn't even have this issue right now, and depriving her from sleep. And then here's another thing. This case that I'm thinking of is that her abuser began to tell her how many people succumb to the illness. and literally brought a body bag in the house and said, this is where I'm gonna put you. The moment you stop breathing, this is where you going. Sure did. And then, so now let's go into the mental and emotional, right? Do you think that can lead to some mental and emotional challenges for someone that say they love you, you share your body with, your bed with, your life with, who committed to love you, and come in and say, I have a bag to put you in when the moment you stop breathing, and then went and bought a dress. This is a dress I'm going to bury you in. Let's think about that mental condition, that mental challenges that could result in that. And then on top of, well, I can't really tell nobody because they're not going to understand it. They're going to blame me and tell me I need to leave my home and I really have nowhere else to go. Or wherever I go, they're going to find me anyway. Or if I leave, then they've already told me they're going to kill my mother. Like, put it all like what many victims are experiencing on a daily basis for many of them. And then also that strangulation. I'm going to come back to strangulation in just a little bit. Emotional abuse, name calling, blaming. I've heard women say, I'd rather be punched than to be called out my name, because being called out of my name lasts so much longer than a punch is like a sting. And so that's what I've heard them say. No one wants to be punched. No one wants to be hit. No one wants to be a victim of domestic violence. This is what some of the feedback we're getting. What's the less painful? The less painful is just that hit that's only going to sting real quickly. But being called my name, it plays over and over and over and over and over. Some abusers actually give the silent treatment. Like, that's painful. Or the victim is being ignored. Like, he won't talk to her. And that can lead to a lot of mental and psychological and emotional abuse. Many are experiencing this on a daily basis. The criticizer, you can't do anything right. You've already lost 4 jobs and you're about to lose this one. That's why you failed school. And you don't know how to be a mother. You don't know how to take care of a parent. I don't know who told you you was good enough to be a mother. Even God don't see you. I mean, all of this into someone on a daily basis, playing those mind games and psychological undermining. I'll give one example. There was someone I was working with, and that was referred to our program to come and speak with a counselor. And the individual came into the program saying, hey, I'm the abuser. I'm the one that hit my husband. Yes, I hit him. He is a victim. Yep, and I'm just telling on me. I'm just going to be honest about it. Yes, I do, because it gets on my nerves what he does to me. So when we begin to talk about the pattern of abuse and what was really happening, what that individual saw at the end of that session is that, no, she's actually the victim. And what her partner had been doing is taking information that she had gotten at the hospital and lift up this big dresser and put the cards under the leg of it. And she would go, now, how did that get there? And he would say, I don't have your stuff. I mean, what I'm going to do? I'm going to have your stuff like that. And so he really convinced her that it was her and her mind and that she was making things up. The verbal threats, that's a big one as well. Lots of verbal threats, throwing things, destroying things, harming pets, reckless behavior, facial expressions, once again. And a lot of these things also tie into and impact one's emotional, mental well-being, where a lot of times they disassociate for themselves and can't believe this is happening, or can't believe I got myself in this situation. There is no way out. No one's going to help me or believe me, and how that can have such a damaging and impactful, effect on someone's mental ability or mental health. Isolation, I talked about this already, keeping the victim from contact with other people and disrupting their support system and support networks. Economics, controlling the money, harassment at work, threatening coworkers. I've heard several people to say, now he's, threatening my coworkers. And now I'm just going to stop talking to them because I don't want to bring nobody else into this. I don't want nobody else to get hurt. I don't, it's no need to do that. Like they haven't done anything. So then they'll cut their friends and their coworkers off for the sake of trying to protect them. Sexual abuse, forcing sex. And as a result of forcing sex, a victim might have an experiences of living with STDs. I believe I'm going to share that in just a moment as well. So that's sexual abuse, once again, or false accusations or sexual name calling. There have been many that I've worked with where weapons have been used against them sexually. One individual did talk about her abuser shoved a pop bottle up her vagina, and it did so much damage to her. So the thing is, a lot of times with abusive relationships, battering, right at the center, we see a lot of times there's denial, minimizing and blaming. We also see at many situations, there's a use of drugs and alcohol, and these are two overlapping epidemics. A lot of times people think just because someone drinks or smokes, they're abusive. And that's not necessarily true. We do know that there are plenty of people who drink and smoke that don't abuse their partners, as well as there are many that don't drink and don't smoke, yet they abuse their partners. And battering is a learned behavior. Sometimes, many times, victims will say, I could just get her to stop drinking. If I could just stop her from getting high, things would be fine. If I could just get her to just go get some help. But what we found, even when those that use battering behavior and go to a drug treatment program, 12-step program, most likely, a lot of times, they continue their battering behavior unless they first take responsibility and see that their behaviors are wrong. A lot of times, batterers feel like they have the right to do what they do, and that their victims are their property, and they do whatever they want to do with their property. No one gets to tell me what to do. Usually that's the mentality of batterers and perpetrators. So whereas these are dual epidemics, there needs to be dual treatment or dual unlearning, dual help for both of them. So something to keep in mind, there's no one stereotypical victim of domestic violence. You cannot look at someone and tell they are a victim. Leaving is not a cure. Leaving is one of the most dangerous times of a person's life. It is one of the most dangerous times. 40% of women and 32% of men in a former violent marriage reported violence after the separation. Violence began after the separation. And then 59% who left and separated fear for their lives. I have far too many stories across the entire nation where I've been doing my work, across this entire nation, of people who left an abusive relationship, thought they were safe. I'm good, I'm over it, I'm done. Whew, that's over. But what we know based on a lot of stories that we hear is that the abuser decides it's not over until I say it's over, even to the point they'll go and find their victim and will not stop until they find them. There's been many women who have gone to shelters. I know in my city where a woman went to a shelter, what her partner did, went through every alley of that city until they found her car and put a note on the car and say, I found you. You better get your so-and-so home. So leaving does not equal a cure-all. Leaving does not equal safety. And it's the abuser that makes that decision on whether they will accept the relationship ending or not. Once again, power and control says it doesn't end until I say it's over. It's not over until I say it's over, right? So that losing control. The reality is most women do leave. Abusive relationships develop over time, right? I think a lot of victims they had a second date, and the second day we were together, I got punched and slapped and hit and kicked. I don't think there would be a third date. So abusive relationships do happen over time. And here's what I've told people that I work with. A lot of times they'll try to protect the perpetrator and say, well, you know what? It's my husband. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But he really, he is a really good man. You know, he's just sometimes when he's drinking. And what I have always said, I am not expecting you to protect your partner or to speak well of them in my presence. That is not my expectation of you. My concern is your safety. And when I say that, those guards come down. Because what they want to stop is the abuse, not the relationship. The abuse, not the love that they thought they had. So that's a key thing, is letting the individual know, I am not here to judge you or your relationship or your marriage. I am not here to tell you need to leave and get out of there. A lot of times people don't want to open up and share with us because they think we're going to judge them and tell them they need to leave. And if they don't leave, we're going to cut them off. But a lot of times if they leave because we say you got to leave, and then it gets worse or they get harmed near death or something, that shuts us down from them hearing us. That shuts them down from hearing us. Because the thing they'll probably say, I listened to that counselor and she told me what, it got worse. I ain't listening to nobody else no more. I'm gonna go with my own man and what I think. So that limits the possibility of us being heard. Leaving is a process. And you may never know the impact your intervention may have. And just your willingness to listen. I'm going to show a video real quickly. I am watching our time here, and I appreciate you for being here. Okay, let's get it cracking.
Decided to go forward with the divorce paperwork. When we got out in the parking lot, he told me he had something for me.
That's when the knots came in my stomach.
Despite all the emotional abuse and manipulation she went through, April never saw what was coming next.
He gave me a little bag. You make the first move. You pull the trigger first. And the bag had 2 toy water guns. We found ourselves kind of having this little silly water gun fight. We both kind of got teary-eyed and we embraced, and we told each other that we loved each other. And he was like, you don't have to file.
He said there's only one way out of this marriage. And I said, well, what did he say? He said, you know. April, that sounds like he's threatening you. You're a district attorney. You know better than I do.
You always think that I'm coming back, and this time I'm not coming back. The next morning, I got up and I was bringing my friend back home. And as we were sitting in my car, I glanced over. I saw my husband standing in front of the window on the passenger side. And I saw his arm coming up. I remember that first pop. I remember this ringing feeling. I remember that smell. I didn't even have time to scream. I'm not dead. I'm not dead. And then I blacked out.
What did he do to her? What did he do? To see your child's hands puffed up. They had shaved off her hair. This whole head, she was wrapped. Oh, back here.
My then husband shot 10 rounds into the car. I was hit by 3 of those rounds. My paralysis, I have no sensation from the chest down. My hands are impaired. I have no feeling, hot, cold, pain, and no voluntary movement. The bullet shattered my jaw. My main way of getting around was with a power wheelchair. I also need a caregiver every day. My mom is very hands-on with me, going to the bathroom, getting dressed.
It's like starting all over. It's like a baby. And that's your 30-year-old child.
There was immediately a manhunt. He was later found in the cemetery with a bullet wound to his head. He had taken his life. I hate to say it, but I did feel a little relief because I felt like it's over. The saga is over, but at the same time, I was tremendously sad because it's like I will never see him again, and we'll never get it right.
Okay. Wow, let's take a deep breath through that. You know, that is a reality for many people. And so I'm going to go into showing some of the warning signs once again of domestic violence, homicide. Give me a moment here. I'm trying to make my way back to my presentation. I hope you're taking some deep breaths. I hope you're breathing. I know this is tough. This is hard. And there's no excuse. There's no excuse. A lot of times victims are blamed and asked, why didn't you leave sooner? Or if it's that bad, why do you stay? And a lot of times victims will stay out of fear, shame, guilt. Maybe family will say, I told you not to get with them, but you didn't want to listen. A lack of resources, like even especially like right now, where are people going to go right now? Religious beliefs is a big one. Beliefs about marriage. Some have said, well, you know what? God put me in this situation. God sent me my husband. I just need to be stronger. I just need to keep praying. I'm just going to get together with some women at the church and we're going to pray this thing through. Or their immigration status, economic dependence, or children. And I know someone who talked about the impact that abuse had on their children. Their child had learned that abusive behaviors, had learned how to be controlling. The child was acting out in school. The child was having sleeping disorders, eating disorders. The child became very promiscuous and started getting involved in gang violence. The child purchased a gun. There's a statistic that says 63% of boys ages 11 to 20 years old who commit murder the man who was abusing their mother. 63% of boys ages 11 to 20 who commit murder the man who was abusing their mother. A lot of times they might purchase a weapon as a way to protect their parent, protect their mom, protect their family. A lot of times they may have thoughts of suicidal ideation, feeling like it's their fault, feeling like they need to do something. If it wasn't for me, this wouldn't be happening. Some actually go into depression. Some actually have mental disorders, anxiety, ADHD, as a result of experiencing and witnessing domestic violence. Even pregnant women who are carrying their unborn child, who might be experiencing abuse, that child can be born with a lot of complications and can be born with a lot of anxiety. Abuse has a devastating effect and impact on individuals' mental health and their lives. Abuse during pregnancy, yes, as I just said, it does occur. There was someone I was working with who was 8 months pregnant, and her partner was so violent and abusive. This one time he walked in the house and she said, I told you don't bring drugs in this house around my kids. I told you I can't have none of this around my kids. You brought this around my kids. And he picked her up and body slammed her to the floor and began to get on top of her stomach and pounced up and down and said, that wasn't none of my baby anyway. I don't even believe that was mine. I ain't been with you like that. Once again, but there was a pattern of abusive behaviors. And what did the community do? Rejected and turned away. The community failed that individual as she had been reaching out for help. Mistimed pregnancies can be a result of abuse during pregnancy. Homicide is a leading cause of maternal mortality. When pregnant women die, or it's usually at the hands of an abuser. And there's so many examples or ways that can happen. Pregnant women being punched in the stomach, as I just gave an example, ran over by a car, drowned, even poisoned and smothered. So 49% of teenage mothers report domestic violence or being forced to have intercourse. And 48% reported birth control sabotage. As I said earlier, pinholes being punched into the condom. So children, the number of children, it's like 10 million children currently that witness domestic violence annually. Where we see mothers being abused, we also see children being abused. If mothers aren't protected, then children aren't protected either. Although mothers, but let's look at who's causing the harm. Let's not look at mothers as you aren't doing anything to protect your children. Let's look at it as the abuser is causing the harm to the children, right? And their parent. Men who batter women more severely were more likely to batter children as well. So these are the health consequences of like physical abuse. We'll see assaults to the head, neck, and torso, strangulation. We'll see multiple injury sites. When it comes to those red flags, once again, these are the things that we see. A threat and use of a weapon, the strangulation, the female was pregnant, the batterer, battered a pregnant partner, animal cruelty. All of these things heightens the risk of domestic violence. So where we see these things, we will see domestic violence there most likely as well. Strangulation. So I want to bring this out. A lot of times it's mentioned as choking, but it's actually strangulation. And what that means is that a lot of times a victim of domestic violence might be grabbed by the throat and it cuts off their circulation. And many have said they blacked out after being grabbed by the throat. A lot of victims have said being grabbed by the throat, they were thrown to the wall. And so many people have died or die as a result of strangulation. And all it takes is seconds, that victim black out and can be considered brain dead. That's why it is so crucial and important. In many states now, strangulation is seen as, yes, a risk factor for homicide. So if you're talking with people, working with people, you have family members, or even maybe some of you yourselves and you're being strangled, you're experiencing that, that's a risk factor for homicide. So these are the risk factors for homicide. A firearm is owned or in the home, whereas it's under the guise of protecting the family or protecting women or protecting the wife and daughters. Usually that weapon is used on a partner or a child. A male offender is most likely to threaten to commit suicide, which usually commits suicide, homicide, and then suicide, as in the case we just said here. Thank God her life was not taken. And then prior suicide attempts as well are risk factors for homicide. So we have someone that's talking about committing suicide or suicide ideation. Let's find out what's really going on with the individual without judgment to them. So it is important to understand that individuals often identify the act of strangulation as choking. However, there is a significant difference between the two. You choke off of food and you strangle by human hands. Okay, so yeah, pressure on the neck, restricts those and closes the blood vessels. Risk factors for women that have killed their abusers, was in a married long-term relationship and felt trapped. They had children they were protecting. They experienced severe violence, which includes stalking. The violence was getting worse and increasing. Maybe it was a fight once a month, and then it went from a fight once every 3 weeks, and now it's every single day. Okay. Those women also that committed murder had fewer resources. They were unemployed, had poor health, less schooling. Once again, they were trapped and isolated and didn't see any way out but to kill. And as pretty much as the lady we just saw in the video, at least I don't have to deal with the abuse and the violence anymore. I don't want them dead. I didn't want them dead, but I get a sense of relief now. So the principles of intervention: increase the victim and the children's safety. The bottom line is this: if it's not safe to talk and have these conversations, Don't have them, especially don't have them in front of children. At the hospital, patients would bring their children, and if they were asked about abuse, are you experiencing abuse? Are you safe at home? Those children would go right home and tell their dad. Mommy was telling the nurse that sometimes you make her cry, and she was crying. So we want to be very cognizant of talking in front of children. Respect the autonomy of the adult victim. If they say, I gotta go home, then respect that. If they say, no, I hear you, I can't go get no order of protection, that just ain't gonna work. That ain't gonna work. I can't go to the police. That ain't gonna work. That ain't gonna work. What I've known in a program in a city that I worked at where Black women were calling the police, guess what? When the police showed up on the scene, the police arrived there, guess what would happen? Her sons will also now have to prove their identity, be searched, and the whole DV situation was now turned into something else. And then she never got what she needed. So there are lots of reasons why people don't want to call the police now. So the police, we know, is not helpful for everybody. It's not a resource for everyone. Everyone may not see that as a resource, especially in the Black community. So also, here's a key thing: hold the perpetrator accountable, not the victim, by blaming the victim for not doing something to stop the abuse. So threats, it is our responsibility to take threats seriously. New strategies are needed to maintain fear. We need to know, what does that look like for that individual? Words are often rehearsed to action. This comes from, threats can come from a multiple of sources. I'm gonna stop, helping with the bills. You can't use the car. You're not gonna make it to school. I ain't picking the kids up no more. I'm not getting them to school, and you better not go to that church. If you go to that church, I know where to find you and your mama, because when you go to that church, I know where to find you. And then it can go on and on and on, like threat after threat after threat after threat after threat, which really highly raises the risk factor for homicide. You better watch yourself. I'm gonna hurt you. I'll make sure you never see the kids again. Abusers have actually killed kids and left the parent so that she's in more pain and in regret and wishes she had never reached out for help or never dared to leave. I've got a gun and don't think I won't use it, right? I've heard some abusers, victims have said their abusers told them, man, if I kill you, ain't nobody gonna find you. Nobody care anyway. You're a Black woman. Ain't nobody gonna be looking for you. They ain't gonna care. All I'm gonna say is you left with your lover. I don't know where you went. I ain't see you. They ain't gonna come for you. And how true is that? How true is it that Black women are coming up missing every single day and not looked for? So that's a reality for many people, and I'll kill you. Barriers to leaving is language barriers, loss of custody, deportation, racial profiling, fear of increased violence, financial dependence, lack of resources. And I want to highlight the fear of deportation. There are lots of Black women and children who are immigrants who are at the border, but nobody sees their faces and nobody knows their names. So we expand our understanding on who victims are and who are considered part of the most vulnerable populations of individuals. Separation is dangerous. As I conclude, separation is extremely dangerous. The victim knows the best time to leave and when. They do. The first incident of physical violence for 1 in 5 women, it's a life-threatening incident. 45% of those homicides, the catalyst was the woman attempting to leave. What is the responsibility? Community responsibility. Community responsibility is to hold the batterers accountable. The systems hold the batterers accountable. Men can hold the batterers accountable by not victim blaming, by not protecting a batterer and upholding them in their wrong. Right? By demonstrating and displaying, exhibiting healthy men behaviors, healthy men relationships. The media can put the blame where it belongs educating the community on when we hear news reports about a woman was missing, a woman was found in a dumpster, a woman was raped. A lot of times the media does not come back and say she knew the person that assaulted her. It's important that we name it. Social service providers become part of this change, the system of bringing changes. Not penalizing Black women for coming forth, not blaming them for their situations, not putting barriers in their place where they got to do all these things just to get a bid or just to get a bus card. They got to do all these things. Now they're in the DCFS system. Now they're in the DCF system because they've tried to get help, and we accuse them of not wanting to protect their children. So it's all the systems pointing towards batterers for accountability and increasing safety nets on behalf of women and children. That is the community responsibility. It's to hold the batterers accountable and to say violence and abuse is not acceptable in our community. It is not okay. We cannot predict the future. People may become lethal without notice. We may not know up to the very minute, right? Even people that we're working with, there could be changes, drastic changes in the snap of a finger. Someone with all the signs of homicide may never perform a lethal act. Someone that makes those threats may never do it. Someone that never makes threats may do it. Someone who's always making threats may not do it. So we learn from our victims, we learn from survivors. And someone with no outward signs may be killed. So it's so important. The church can be a place of respite and safety, a place where victims can turn without fear, without judgment, without being put down, without being put out, without being forced into couples counseling. Couples counseling is dangerous for when there is violence in a relationship, because you're going to have one that's going to talk, do all the talking, and you're going to have one that's not going to say much of anything. So you're most likely not going to get the true picture of what's happening within that relationship, or that family might be moved away from that church and that family become more isolated. So exercising well-being to feel valued. Victims need to feel valued as members of the community, value their well-being, their safety, their presence, which means you matter to us. Here's the National Domestic Violence Hotline, where there are counselors ready, available to take your call. It's private, it's confidential. No one's gonna show up at your home. If you call and report domestic violence, you don't have to give your real name, your information. You don't have to mention your children. It's a place where you can get help. And once again, it is confidential. So I thank you for attending my session. Here's my contact information. And thank you for your patience with us today. And thank you for staying a tiny bit beyond. And again, I appreciate you so very much. Thank you, Integral Care team. I appreciate you as well.
Thank you, Ms. Jacqueline. That was a wonderful presentation. We still have people who have stayed beyond that 5 o'clock hour because they were very interested in the topic that you are discussing and that the information that you brought forward. I do want to remind people, because I have been reading through the chat, that we do still have our comfort room, and if not, to remind yourselves that if you need someone to speak with, or you just need to process some of this information that was provided through this presentation, that you reach out to that 472-4357 number, press 1, and then 1 again to get that emotional support if you need it. There's only about 1 or 2 questions, so hopefully I hope people are okay with her answering these questions. I believe the first one was answered. I'm not sure if it went with this presentation or not, but the second one was, they wanted to thank you so much for this topic. Since I have a personal experience with this, I would like to be a source of support for other women and men that have also gotten out of this situation. Is there an organization that exists where I could provide peer support or volunteer my time? I know what I went through is to help others.
Okay, what did they need in and asking for support for others?
Yeah, well, they're wondering if there are any organizations out there where they can volunteer their time or be a peer support for someone. Because what they're saying is that their lived experience, the experience that they have lived through, is a lot. They want to give back and to help others.
Yeah, I would say call the National Domestic Violence Hotline, because they may have a number of community centers or places where you can go, where sometimes survivors, there may be community support groups out there. And I would say, you know, call there and ask if they have a list. Sometimes a lot of local churches might have support groups for women. And it would be so awesome. Perhaps you would be the one to start it up. Maybe you could be one, you know, to reach out to a community center, community organization, maybe a parents group. Sometimes at the schools, they are looking for people to come in and speakers. I do know that to be true as well. So because victims are everywhere, right? Victims are everywhere, and there's no particular profile of a victim, as I said earlier. So that may be something that is needed, you know, especially during this time right now. So I don't know if you're involved in a group or a church or some type of club to say, hey, I'd like to speak, because a lot of times there are victims there, people don't think so because everybody looks okay.
Yes, so true. Thank you. The second question is, are you able to speak to the effects of domestic violence on children? My brother acted out at school, but it was because of the trauma at home. However, no one asked questions, and possibly he would not have said anyway, or he probably would not have said anyway that there were problems at home.
Yeah, a lot of acting out. That's what a lot of children do. They may not know what to do. Sometimes children might try to be the protector, and in the midst of trying to be the protector, get hurt as a result of jumping in or protecting their parent. So again, sometimes children have nightmares. They're afraid. They might be have a lot of anxiety going on. And what we've seen, like with babies, when they've gone to the hospital for maybe like a checkup or a visit, when someone reached at them, doctors have said the child would draw up and be really clingy and really fussy and crying a lot and made not want to eat. So it affects children in so many ways. It affects their ability to learn as well. If children are living in fear, that actually cripples them. It cripples their ability to learn, and it also cripples their creativity as well.
All right, thank you, Miss Jackie. The last one is, they wanted to know if you could share the video link, the video that you showed, if you could share that link.
Yes, I sure will. I will put it in the link in the app. I will make sure it's there. I will share that, as well as a couple of other videos that you might appreciate having. One is specifically women who were talking about their experiences as it relates to church and faith. One lady said she lost her faith in God. She felt like God was allowing her to just suffer and didn't care about her anymore. And her abuser told her, there's no God for you. There's no God for you. As well as a pastor's wife was talking about it and said if she had stayed with her husband, she'd be a dead wife.
All right, well, thank you. We really, really appreciate this wonderful presentation that you brought forward here today. I learned a lot. I know just looking at the chat, and if you have an opportunity to go back and read through the chat, you will hear a lot of personal journeys being shared, and people really connecting with what you were saying and are appreciative of the work that you are doing. And so we want to thank you for coming and sharing with us. at the Central Texas African American Family Support Conference. We appreciate all the work that you have done and all the work that you continue to do. The last reminder is, I know people have already clicked on the links. Don't forget about your CEUs, and please don't forget about the survey for this session. I think this was a wonderful session, and I gained a lot of knowledge. I am also going to be looking for the links to those videos. So we thank you, and I thank everybody that is still on the line. It says we still have about 34 people on the line. Thank y'all for staying to the end. We appreciate you all. And again, thank y'all for joining us at this 22nd Annual Central Texas African American Family Support Conference. You guys have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonia.
You're welcome. Thank y'all. You guys take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye-bye.